Welcome, welcome, welcome back to Fear It Goes, you beautiful souls. And today we are speaking with Kate Madden. I am very excited to bring you this story because it is one that I was truly unaware of for quite some time. And she has enlightened me on someone coming into themselves through a community like the LGBTQ. And today, Kate shares her story of transition, acceptance, major change, and all of the struggles that come along with it. I hope you enjoy today's episode. There is much to be gained from this listen. Thanks again, beautiful souls, and enjoy the show. Welcome to Fear It Goes, the podcast all about taking your fears with you and doing it anyway. I'm your host, Brandy Taylor. Hi, Kate. How are you doing?
Brandy, I am so sick and tired of the snow. It is spring. It is May 4th on date of recording. And on May 4th, we have had 3 days of snow in this month already.
Oh my gosh, it is May 4th. May the 4th be with you. So funny. It's true. And we've had humongous snowfalls. Like the one last weekend was such big snowflakes and so big, like such a large quantity of snow. There was over a foot of snow on my car when I left a meeting I was in last weekend. It was crazy.
Yeah, I'm done.
So, hello, spring. Will you just come already?
Do this over the amazing powers of the internet and to record this and not have to go outside again today.
Wonderful. So it's a pleasure having you here, Kate. I'm so excited that we get to share your story and this journey that you've been on because it's quite remarkable, the journey that you have shared with me. And I want to say thank you so much for enlightening me and giving me an opportunity to really understand the trials and tribulations and journey that people go through when they're transitioning or when they are coming to terms with more of who they are. So I just want to say thanks.
Well, thank you for all your support and friendship.
I am very happy to give that. And without further ado, I would love for you to share the story that you have so kindly shared with me.
Sure. So I've always known that I was trans is representative of my earliest memories from 3, 4, 5 years old, just knowing something was not the same as anyone else. But it was something that I always fought against and really tried out of fear to push down. I was afraid of upsetting my parents, of upsetting my siblings. I was a good little Catholic altar server. I didn't want to upset my church. I went to an all-boys boarding school. Didn't want to upset my friends or lose my friends. And it was a very fear-driven, rules-based world that I grew up in. What's great about growing up in that very polarized environment where this is wrong and this is right, this is black, this is white, is that it gives you a lot of stability and security when you're dealing with a lot of internal displacement and internal disorientation. So even though I knew I was trans, I was fighting against it constantly because I had this system I could cling on to.
Would you say that you really knew you were trans from that age? Like you were pretty familiar with what that meant and what that was? Or was it just more of a conflict within and not really fully understanding that?
Sure. So I've talked before or thought before about Bugs Bunny, and I would often
example.
I would often joke that Looney Tunes made me trans, like it was a bad influence. As I was trying to fight against it, I was like, something's wrong with me if Bugs Bunny has done this to me. But really, what it was that was the first experience I had where I could articulate or I could identify that that was me. Moving into my teenage years, the only real exposure I had was talk shows, TV talk shows, Jerry Springer, Donahue. I think Donahue was the first time that, and this is really dating myself, but sometime in the mid 80s or late 80s, seeing that classic Donahue episode of him in a dress.
I never saw that episode.
But I did. And it stuck in my brain for the last 35 years.
I
and
can imagine.
Every other trans person who is in their mid 40s,
early 40s.
They remember that too. And so it was my only exposure, my only influence, Maury Povich, Jerry Springer. I thought Oprah Winfrey in the early 2000s, she really handled the subject with a lot of sensitivity and handled it really, really well. You could probably Google Jennifer Finley Boylan, I think is her name. She's a writer with the New York Times. She first appeared on Oprah, I want to say 2004, the summer of 2004. Mm-hmm. But it started to give me a language, and it started to give me something to identify with, but then also to fight against. And so that Oprah episode, I was at work in sales. I was knocking on doors, talking to clients, and my former partner called me up in tears because it was too close to our story. And so eventually I to that point, I got married to a beautiful woman with whom I had 6 children, had a beautiful family, very privileged middle-class life, beautiful house. I checked off all the boxes. And through it all, I repeatedly tried to transition and then just had repeated failed attempts at transition.
What were the failures?
I would get to the point where either I wanted to do it or I started to take steps to do it. And I would see that my marriage was falling apart. My marriage would end. Like the consequences were
humongous.
Yeah. And so, this went on for years until kind of mid 2017. I tried to kill myself, swam out into the ocean, researched riptides, put myself into a position where I could get sucked out. Drank a lot that day. And I swam back in after a while of floating. And over the next few months, I kind of realized 2 things. One, I wasn't really living my life for my happiness. I was trying to make everybody else in my world happy.
At the demise of yours. Yeah.
Yeah, at my expense. And I realized that while I had always seen these things on TV, or I would secretly read these things online or download trans podcasts when I would go out of town or things like that, and then clear my history, so that I was never confused. I always framed my gender identity as my gender confusion.
Yeah.
It was never confusion. It was fear of the consequences of coming to terms
with
who I really was.
What that would mean for the rest of your life, like the other areas in your life. Yes.
And when you consider my role, so, I work for Canada's largest insurance company. I run a multi-million-dollar operation. I deal with hundreds of employers, small and mid-sized businesses throughout Western Canada, entrepreneurs, executives, high-performance sales people. And I was terrified professionally of what it meant. Could I work
Could
as
you
a
survive
salesperson.
that coming out? Yeah.
Yeah, like that was my primary block after, the marriage. Once I told my former partner that I needed to do this, I couldn't continue. That then became the next topic was, oh my God, how am I going to maintain my current level of income, which is variable, over 50% variable based on commission? Um, how do I maintain that and maintain our lifestyle? Um, and so that was terrifying. And there were no resources available. Like I went on every online forum I could find. Um, I met a lot of trans women who work in IT and um, they work in coding. They work in engineering. Like a lot of it seems to be those are industries that attract a lot of trans women.
Do you think it's
Because
just that they're more accepting?
I think, especially with the computer-based stuff, is at least with trans women my age,
Yeah.
is they can hide,
Right.
perhaps.
It's not face forward.
And I could be wrong. And dear fellow trans sibling, if you're listening and you take exception to that, contact Brandy, let her know. I'd love to have a conversation about it.
Yes.
However, I went to multiple forums, multiple websites, just trying to find another trans woman who was a high performance salesperson, like relationship based, not transactional, retail based, but high performance business to business salesperson. I found one in Toronto and kind of one in California. Um, and that's it. When you consider
Wow.
the thousands of trans women who would have seen my posts and my requests, and we're a percentage of a minority. Like we're not a
Right.
very significant percentage of the population, but still, I think it's reasonable to assume that tens of thousands of trans women around the world, because I did get a message from someone in the UK, that they would have seen that and really.
You think the community would be bigger or reach out more? Or maybe do you think there's a stigma and that's why maybe they didn't? Like it's just still too closed? Thinking along the lines of societal acceptance and community and how far reaching the communities are even still now or not very far
Yeah,
reaching,
so
right?
I got through a friend of a friend. Like I still had a beard when this happened. Like I think I had just told my former partner. So one of my dearest friends, who's known me for decades, has a friend who transitioned here in Calgary, and knew my concern about being in a professional environment. And so he hooked me up with a trans woman, a major oil and gas company who leads a team of 120 people, 110 people, is a geologist. And we had a coffee and a very serious conversation about something called a parachute transition. And
What's
so
that?
that was where my mind was at, was that I had to leave Calgary, which is this
Right, right.
conservative and conservative environment, or at least it pretends to be, and that I would have to move to Vancouver or Toronto. And so the idea was that I would parachute in to Vancouver or Toronto in a professional capacity, still leaning on my skill set, my experiences, my education, my ability. But nobody would know me as my dead name, and nobody would know me pre-transition. I would just show up one day as Kate, and that was that.
I remember when you told me that you were moving into Kate and that you had started um, taking the hormones, and it was such a scary but very exciting time for you. Scary because you didn't know how anyone was going to accept this,
Yeah,
and exciting because it was stepping into yourself for the first time in your whole life, really truly stepping into you. Yeah, amazing.
yeah. And so here we are, a year and a half later, still in Calgary, and
Not parachuting.
not parachuting. I'm very, very grateful to my employer that while they gave me the opportunity to interview and apply for roles in Toronto and Vancouver, I just wasn't the right fit for those positions. And that's awesome. That's fine. That's great. But I work in a relationship-based industry, and the people whom I had supported for years and helped for years really now had an opportunity to support me and help me. And I needed to realize that. And there were a couple of people who were whispering in my former partner's ears, and I still struggle with that. The introduction of doubt and fear that was brought into our life through that, about how nobody would accept me, nobody would want to work with me. It's not to say that it's been easy, and I have learned that there is a massive difference between acceptance and support, and that's fine. If you have an issue with where my life has taken me, like, that's great. But to be fair to all of my coworkers and clients, I have not had a single issue working with the hundreds of people that I do at the level that I do.
There was an acceptance.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
And I mean, are there support? And, people who I was close with before, a couple of them I'm not as close anymore. And that's fine. Like, as people leave your life, others enter.
Mm-hmm.
I get dead named still a lot.
Can you explain that? I know what that means, but
yeah. So to be dead named in a trans context is the name that you were assigned at birth is the name that folks will use with you. And I can accept that it will happen and that it does happen. It's never done out of malice, but it can be really frustrating and really difficult when you've already pulled someone aside, or you've already corrected them or educated them.
And because it doesn't fit you anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're Kate.
I am who he always wanted to be at the end of the day. And the other kind of difficult challenge with transitioning with people who have known you a long time, whether family or work or friends, is misgendering. And so
right.
what that means is using incorrect pronouns. That's more frustrating than the dead name, to be honest, because what it kind of demonstrates to me is in those situations where you have educated people, and I've really tried to be an open book.
You have been amazing that way, to be honest. Like I couldn't have asked for something better than what you've offered. You've offered a very open discussion without frustration or anger towards anybody who's asked questions. And because we come from a place of ignorance, I do. I came from a place of ignorance. I didn't really know anything about this. And I have a much, much better understanding and a lot more compassion and empathy to the community and those that are in it. And my sister is gay. And it's actually allowed me to see her from a new light as well. And it's beautiful. And I'm really grateful for that.
To that point, like with your sister, is that what I'm trying to do is personalize the experience so that people can take it and learn from it, so that the next trans person or the next queer person they meet, there is that compassion and understanding. Or they're at a party or a function, or someone says something ignorant or unfair towards gender or sexually diverse people, and they're able to just not necessarily defend or speak out, but create space to be an ally and say, well, no, it's not quite the way it is. And so right. I just try to personalize it, and so I try to engage people, and it hurts at this point, a year and a half later, and I mean, you can talk about my voice, but you can talk about my hair.
I think your hair looks great.
I do too. I really like my hair, says she as she plays with her hair. But what it makes me question is everything. And the reason for that is, if this is my friend or my colleague who's known me for years and they can't accept me as a woman in their brain, like they can't make that connection. Because it's not that I've made this choice. It's not that I realized I was born in the wrong body or that I now identify as female. It's that I was always female and that I was socialized not as a male, but as a girl trying desperately to understand what was wrong and why she couldn't participate in the world like everyone else could.
Because you look different?
Yeah, I was a football player, I was a soccer player. I tried my best. Really, I tried really hard
to fit in
every
which what everybody else wanted you to be.
And I was a chameleon, and I just took whatever script I was handed and I ran with it, which is really great in a sales environment, let me tell you.
Very handy skill set.
This is a long-winded response to your question. Which I guess could be on my gravestone. So transition sucks. It's not for the faint of heart. It's the worst thing I've ever done. Ultimately from a mental health perspective.
For a few reasons. Not only the transition itself, but the losses that you've experienced because of it. I think those are very intertwined.
And I have quite literally lost everything. Yeah, lost my marriage of 15 years. I have children who don't speak to me, not necessarily as a result of transition, but more that toxic masculinity prior to transition and the trauma that inflicted on them.
That's actually, let's go into that just a little bit. It's kind of funny that you say the toxic masculinity. In your case, that was a matter of you trying to fight what you are, and then how it just kind of came out.
I can't count the number of times I said to my oldest son, be a man. I created this amazing ideal of a man and a family man that when I transitioned, it blew that all up in so many ways and made him relive all sorts of trauma. I think because I tried so hard to be that guy, that
to fight who you are, to fit in, to be everything for somebody else,
that I
and suppress
everything. So it's a terrible thing. And
suppression does build up a lot of anger and resentment, doesn't it?
It sure does. And I was very angry, very hostile, very frustrated, aggressive.
You were and you weren't.
Well, don't confuse being I was able to have compartment. I was able to. Well, yeah, I definitely compartmentalized and sublimated and all that, but I wasn't at ease. I was just able to maintain a sense of normalcy and a sense of what's the word I'm looking for? I was polite. I was well-mannered.
You lived well on the surface, but really below it, you were kind of...
I was a maelstrom. So yeah, it wasn't... it wasn't without a lot of internalized stress and anxiety that I never learned how to process. And it was only once I transitioned and took the mask off that all of a sudden now I had anxiety and dealing with, all these losses.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, transitioning is not for the faint of heart. However, while I say flippantly that it sucks, It's the best thing I've ever done, because now I'm real. Now I'm here. Now I get to feel, even on these terrible days, when I miss my kids or I miss my spouse, or I worry about whether or not I'm going to have a job, or that it's real and I can experience it. And even if that means I'm lying on bed staring at the ceiling, I'm still alive and I'm still walking through and learning how to process these emotions. So previously I would punch a wall in that frustration, that inability through that toxic masculinity to articulate my emotion or my experience. Now I might cry, but it's like a catharsis and it's a release, and I always feel better afterwards. And I'll take an ugly cry over a fist through the wall any day of the
Any
week.
day. Any day.
So I think transitioning, becoming who I really am, as opposed to being someone who I tried to be, has made me a better friend, a better coworker, and most importantly, a better parent.
I think you've done some incredible things within the community too, though, to help raise awareness and an environment that really is connected for transgenders. And we were talking about the community and how they feel safe or not to come out.
Yeah, so within the trans community, and or rather within the larger community, like the heteronormative cisgender community, you might hear people talking about that there's this epidemic of trans people or trans kids, or people are being persuaded or influenced.
Oh my God, that's just a funny thought. Yeah, I just woke up one day and decided I wanted to be a transgender. I just woke up today and felt like I wanted to be gay. Like that is such a farce.
It is, and it displays a tremendous ignorance and bigotry, right? And
I think it's more an ignorance, though. I honestly do think that's more of an ignorance, maybe a lack of education.
To a point. And so what I think it is, though, across at least Canadian society, like I think in Canada, we are, as a community, incredibly lucky.
I would agree.
Like, because we are safe, we have legislative protections. And no, that doesn't mean you're going to go to jail, Jordan Peterson, if you don't use the correct pronouns. But what it does mean is that here in Canada, we have universal health care. We have access to gender affirming surgeries that are covered through that health network. And it's safe. When you look at trans kids, and one of the reasons why so many trans people are passionate about trans kids and helping trans kids is because we were trans kids and we made it through. And like across the LGBT spectrum, over 40% attempt suicide. And
do you think it's because of the inner turmoils, trying to understand it, trying to come to terms with it? Because it wasn't, maybe it's a lot more accepted now. Well, I still wouldn't even say that, but it wasn't really an accepted thing, and trans kids didn't really exist in the world of society.
I mean, I certainly never saw anyone my age transition.
Like when you were a kid?
When I was a teenager, no.
Right.
Now, I mean, I can list off multiple.
That's good.
Kids in their teens, and you could argue that these kids aren't old enough to know whether or not they are trans or they aren't trans, but they're old enough to know they want to kill themselves, and a lot of kids do succeed. And it's not so much that there's a lack of acceptance; it's that there's a fear, whether it's with family reject. I was terrified of my dad. In a Catholic family, I would dance around the subject. I would come up to the subject, and as a teenager, he'd always say, well, we'll have a conversation about that. And, sex ed with my father was really like, don't do this or I'll thump you. Yeah.
That's excellent sex ed.
Yeah.
Oh, good God.
Don't even get me started on the priests teaching me biology in high school.
Yeah, that'd be excellent.
Yes. Father Nicholas, that's a story for another time. Although I had a wonderful experience with all the priests who taught me through elementary and high school, and I'm very grateful to all the good men who gave their lives in service to the community that they chose to serve out of love for the most part. Not to say it wasn't without challenges, but I am grateful for those experiences. But their sex ed needed some work. The curriculum. But like kids even today, like I'm sure there are kids who are terrified to come out to their parents. Like, if my kid can't tell me about something that happened at school regarding a pop bottle and a wall and some wet toilet paper and a mess, like that's a pretty minor thing. Right. But like if it was something existential, I think even in the most loving and supportive households, you would still have
anxiety around it for sure. These are monumental, life-changing situations coming out and saying, this is who I am, and I'm exposing myself 100%, and I'm so vulnerable. Please love me in this moment.
That's all. Like, all I think anyone coming out is asking for is the opportunity to love and to be loved authentically. Yeah. And that's really what it boils down to.
Being us, right? That's us.
Within the trans community, with the trans kid, you can reduce that suicidality by over 90% through three ways. One is calling them by their preferred name, which might change a couple times before they land. Right. I talked to my sisters, I talked to my mom. I went through a bunch of different names before I arrived at Catherine and Kate, using their pronouns, the correct pronouns, and having that supportive environment. And whether that's a supportive environment within the school or a supportive environment within the family, having those three things all together will reduce suicidality with trans kids. And so it's something that I didn't really understand prior to transition. I was in a burning building. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out. I ran out as fast as I could. And then once I was outside, and you read about this in disaster stuff, like things about disasters, is there's always a secondary wave of death. Right. When people are trying to escape, there's car accidents, there's heart attacks, there's all sorts of different things from the secondary and tertiary events. And so I guess the primary event was coming out. The secondary event was recuperating from that. And now, a year and a half later, I'm starting to recover finally from the trauma of a lot of different things that happened. But I think the biggest learning for me through all of that was safety, and just being tremendously aware of my personal safety and the safety of my community. Privilege, understanding those unearned social benefits that came from being a white male in Alberta. Oh my gosh, because it was incredible. And to walk away from that, it has taught me where all the gaps are. And I think having that experience of loss has really fostered a sense of compassion and empathy that I didn't really have previously. I mean, I cared about people who are disadvantaged or disenfranchised, but I didn't understand. And now to live within an environment where, and I have a tremendous amount of privilege still within the trans community, within the queer community, within the general community. I still have a tremendous amount, and I need to recognize that and accept that and work with that, and to create space and
for those that don't. Yeah.
And to let them speak their experiences and Like, it's not for me to speak for the voiceless. It's to hand on the microphone and let them do it. Just understanding that intersectionality of oppression and just like that systemic oppression has been mind blowing. And a saying I've seen a lot of is that until all of us are free, none of us are free.
Which is true. This is a fight for equality. No, no different than it was for women, no different than it has been throughout history. And there has to be a compassionate eye that's looked at this community for that equality, the fight for equality, or the rights to equality. Because honestly, it doesn't matter what your gender is. It doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is. You are still human, and we should all reside under the same rights. We should all have the same rights.
Yeah. And I suppose on paper, we do here in Canada.
Yeah, biases are not, biases do not show that.
It's exceptionally distressing to see what is happening in the United States with regards to the rolling back of inclusion for trans people there, whether it's in the military or different states' policies with regards to gender affirming care, or in the UK, to just see what the public debate that's going on with regards to the Gender Recognition Act.
Just that mindset, that frame of thinking that there is such a distinction, and who determines that?
Yeah, well, if we look at the recent provincial election here in Alberta, which we're 4 weeks post-election now, in the election campaign, out of the 83 candidates that the governing party that won, there was 6 or 7 that had some pretty
strong viewpoints.
Yeah, regarding everything from immigration to reproductive rights for women to LGBT Albertans. And a couple of them were forced to resign. And a few others, thankfully, weren't put in cabinet. However, what it shows is that, I guess, I'm not going to say that the party that won was racist or homophobic or bigoted. And I'm not going to say that everyone who voted for that party is racist, bigoted, and homophobic. But what I will say is that everyone in Alberta who voted who is racist, homophobic, and bigoted towards queer people, they voted for that party. And that's not okay. That we have a situation here in this province where folks are empowered to communicate and express that. And so I was
perpetuate an old idealism.
Yeah, like there's an old Alberta that no longer exists, that
right.
I think a lot of it is white privilege, white male privilege, that they're pining for. I recognize it as in terms of leaving it. But I was at the grocery store with my son, and I got the notification on my phone that the United Conservative Party had won the election. And I just want to be very clear that I am going to benefit tremendously financially from the policies that this government will put in place. And I am already seeing the economic impact just a few weeks post-election in terms of the clients that I work with. It's like I'm going to do all right here financially. But my question to myself was, I pulled my phone out, was, oh my God, am I safe? And I think a lot of queer people throughout Alberta were asking themselves that. And it was really interesting in the community to watch it kind of split into two camps. One where they were leaving, they were moving to BC, they were moving to Toronto, they were gone or just completely beside themselves with that fear. And the second camp was a group of folks who started to organize almost immediately, and trying to collectively create not an opposition, but create a voice and I think a platform for advocacy for our community. Um, and I'm not really a progressive. I'm a libertarian. I'm a centrist.
I'm more of a centralist too,
and
because I see the
I,
need for both sides.
yeah,
Yeah.
because of that, no party actually represents.
Represented very well. Yeah.
And so I accept that, and I'll go back and forth election to election, but not every queer person is progressive either. And I think there are a lot of folks in the gender and sexually diverse community who may have only voted for the Progressive Party out of a sense of clinging, hoping for safety, or that encouragement of safety. They might be free enterprise, low tax, fiscal conservatives, which I am not, but to a point. But I mean, I'm looking forward to my Lord tax bill. I gotta say.
Oh, isn't everyone?
But now I have a moral question: is what do I do with that?
Right.
You know,
At what cost?
yeah, like I expect my income to go up by a lot, and what responsibility do I have after my family's taken care of to work with that, and how do I contribute to my community to ensure, because I am in a
You're
very
actively in it. You're actively in the community. Tell us
I
about some of the things that you do in the community.
so I work with the LGBT Chamber of Commerce. Really, it's just creating a platform wherein we want to help engage all Albertans and the opportunity that exists here. I've taken a little step back and just taken a leave from the board right now while I deal with just my personal situation and separation and divorce. But so there's that. And then I also volunteer as a mentor for trans youth, working with the Skipping Stone Foundation here in Calgary. And so that's really cool as well to help out in that capacity.
You also have a YouTube channel where you
Yeah.
talk about some of the transgender issues or the issues of the LGBT. I never get this acronym right.
LGBTQSQIIA. I think
See,
that's
I never would have got that right.
But yeah, so it is an alphabet soup, and what I try to do, from a shorthand perspective, yeah, most of the community, the greater community, understands LGBT or LGBTQ. They've heard that.
Yeah.
What I try to use is gender and sexually diverse, GSD. So I think that umbrella term of gender and sexually diverse people kind of encompasses lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, two-spirit, intersex, asexual, aromantic, questioning, and queer.
That's a lot.
And I'm probably forgetting a couple as well. And I don't do that out of disrespect or ignorance.
Right.
I did do a video on it, and I actually had to write it out on, and dear fellow queers, I'm just a little baby queer.
I'm just starting out.
I've been out now for
just about 2 years.
A year and a half. Yeah, I came out at work a year ago last week, and then I transitioned full time about 9 months ago. So I'm still learning, and just be gentle with me.
It's beautiful. Is there anything you would say to someone who is in the midst of a transition or wants to transition, and they're really afraid to do so. Fear is a big limiter for us in so many different ways. So, what would you say that would help them through taking the leap into who they are?
I think any transition, regardless of what's
Yeah.
driving it, any transition is difficult in your life, whether that's job transition, family transition, marital transition, relocation. Um, it does have a physical impact on your brain, or gender transition. And what I would say is that if it's consuming your every waking moment, and if you're not able to really function without thinking about it,
Or
or
it's altering who you are and making you someone else that's bitter or
then,
resentful or angry.
like, if it's changing you
Yeah.
into somebody you don't like, which it was with me for sure. Um, and it was a radio show on CBC talking about depression, that I was like, oh, am I depressed? Like, they were talking about
Right.
insomnia, and I would stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning wrestling with this in my head. But I would say that the energy required to maintain that facade, or to maintain that inner battle with yourself with regards to whether you should or you shouldn't make that leap,
Mm-hmm.
once you can free that up, to be yourself, to love as yourself, or to be loved
Accept
as yourself,
yourself.
to forgive yourself, um, it it's worth it. Like, it's not easy. It's the hardest thing you're going to do.
Would you say like reaching out to a community, getting a mentor, anything like that would be helpful?
Yeah, so I mean, like, any major metropolitan area will have a trans support group of some sort or another. Um, my situation was a little different in that I um, I was still living with my former partner and
Mm-hmm.
trying to navigate that, and so I was trying to be sensitive to that dynamic, and transitioned at work. And like, I met a couple of trans guys, one I work with, and my friend's former classmate. But to actually sit in a room with other trans women wasn't until 2 or 3 months post transition for me. And so it can be done without that community support. I don't recommend it.
It was very helpful having that group though.
It was, I've found tremendous support just with, being able to listen and learn from other trans women and their experiences, whether it's someone who's 21 or 22, working at a coffee shop, or someone who's in their 60s and is, on that other end of the age spectrum. Um, it's been really cool. And so, yeah, I would say reach out to those communities. There's also a lot of great communities online, whether it's on Reddit, on YouTube. There's a lot of trans YouTubers, ranging in different age and different categories, whether it's just makeup or lifestyle. My favorite trans YouTubers are all Canadian. I don't know what it is about what being trans and Canadian, but we seem to do a really good job with it. There's a couple in Toronto that are easily Googled, but you can at least, you've got nowhere else to go, and you can at least identify with other people's experiences, or you can rule out other people's experiences. So those trans tubers in Toronto, for example, like there's 3 of them, for example. So Gigi Gorgeous, who seems to be kind of taken off on her own and moved to LA, and got
Wow.
millions of followers now, subscribers. um, came out of that kind of like, she had a very long story. And years ago, I would watch her on YouTube, and it was more kind of a feminine gay man who eventually came to terms with her being trans. But, I was able to go, no, that's not me. But yeah, through it all, I never saw someone my age in a professional environment anywhere. So I've added to the conversation, I guess is what I'm saying.
Which is good.
But yeah, there are resources online, communities. Instagram is Twitter, trans Twitter, hashtag trans Twitter. You'll start to see people hashtag girls like us on Instagram or Twitter. And like, I speak from the trans feminine experience, the trans woman experience, but I'm really leaving out a critical piece of the gender identity community, or the gender non-conforming community, the trans community, and that's non-binary people. So, my gender expression is really quite binary. Like, I am feminine. I dress pretty well for work. Usually,
yes, you do.
skirts, makeup. I take my business seriously, and I want to be taken seriously, and so I try to look serious. Occasionally, I'm hot. I'm gonna say I can dial in hot.
You look smoking.
So I'll take that once or twice a week. Although when I'm not at work, I wear jeans and t-shirt like tonight.
Sometimes leggings.
Sometimes leggings. Yes, I have a couple of those. So the trans feminine experience, the trans masculine experience, that female to male experience, and they're some of my favorite people in the world. Chatting with the guys I know here in Calgary, or reading what they write online, really, really interesting stuff. But then there's the non-binary experience, and so there's a difference between gender identity and gender expression. And while I use she and her pronouns, I am a woman, and I can talk about that pretty articulately. There's some folks who, some days will go back and forth, gender fluid, or will be neither. Agender is a term. They'll use X on their driver's license or their passport. Dr. Joshua Ferguson out of Toronto successfully challenged Canadian law and won, I want to say about a year ago. And they have some really interesting perspectives online that I've read. And I find that the non-binary experience has actually informed my understanding of gender identity and gender expression, and completely blown it open.
Can you explain that, please? Because we talked before about gender identity and gender identity, like what you identify with, and then what's the other one?
Gender expression.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So, So gender identity, like I was saying, that you've got that spectrum from male to female, and then you've got people who might identify as neither or have both. And
gender identity.
Yeah, gender identity. So,
right.
I identify as a pretty, I'm in my 40s. I'm a woman. I'm a parent. I'm a professional. And it's not that I chose to take the binary route, either male or female. It's just like, it's what I've always, it's what I've always known. And I'm not trying to speak for my fellow trans people who are in that gender non-conforming experience, but just,
that
I've
that's
learned.
yours.
What's that?
That's yours. And this is really nice because a lot of people don't understand this. And I certainly did not understand this
Yeah.
until
So
we had these discussions.
typically, someone who's non-binary will use they them pronouns, and like if there's ever any doubt, I think a trans person of any persuasion across the entire spectrum would rather you just ask, "What are your pronouns?" than you trying to guess or fumble or worse, misgender them and use the wrong pronouns. Yeah, just ask them what their pronouns are. So they use they them pronouns. It's not androgyny. Like, it's well, it could be androgynous. It could be androgynous. It's not androgyny. In that classical David Bowie way or what
Right.
have you.
And then when it comes to gender expression.
Yeah, like I typically identify or express myself as in a very feminine manner. Um, it's not hard to recognize that with my makeup or my clothing, the colors I wear, how I carry myself, my shoes, my purse, whatever. That I'm female or female identifying. A non-binary person they might be assigned male at birth, they might be assigned female at birth, and you may not be able to tell. Or you might be able to, they might have a beard, but they're still non-binary, or they might look very feminine that day. Our experience with gender expression, gender identity it's changing at a very rapid pace.
Yeah.
And faster than perhaps some people in society are comfortable with.
I think the education around it really needs to be like we need to have a lot more education around it because it's still, I have access to you and I'm still foreign. This is still foreign to me. I mean, I'm a lot more aware now than I was, but it's still pretty foreign to me. And we talk about this. So I can't imagine what it's like for people who just see people on the street and go, well, she's female or that's male, or they just make these assumptions because that's what we've known throughout history.
Yeah, and I think the language is shifting, and the language is being created to help people identify themselves and then to articulate that identity or that expression, and then vocalize it and have others advocate, or they can advocate for themselves out into society. And whether that's gender neutral bathrooms, whether that's an X on a passport or a license, the world has changed. The world has shifted. And even the language that we use in the trans community, from the language that was used in the 90s when I first started going online, my very first internet search was on Alta Vista. I looked up drag queens because that was the limit of my language. That was the limit of my understanding of my experience and my identity was drag queen. And so once I started exploring the trans world back then, like we used words like transsexual, transgender, CD, TS, TV, like a lot of abbreviations that are just no longer used and no longer acceptably used either. I
Just
don't
because
know.
there's been an evolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And so, and it's been really interesting to watch it from a distance as someone who was in the closet, but still part of it. Like this was my community, and I knew that even in the closet. But it's shifted, it's transformed, it's developed, and as more people have been able to safely come out and safely contribute to that ongoing conversation, our language, our experience, our expression, our ability to articulate it has been able to change, and we have been able to have impact and help others understand how we see ourselves. And I think that's all it is.
Cool. I think the more we can educate, the more we can have these discussions, the better off all communities will be.
Thank you for having me, Brandy. I hope I brought value to those who are listening, and help those who maybe this is their first time hearing from a trans woman or a trans person of any sort. Help them understand just a little bit more whatever our experience is.
Do you want to tell us your YouTube channel or your Instagram?
Instagram, Kate Madden .yyc.
Madden with 2 D's. Madden.
Madden. Twitter is the same handle, and on YouTube it's Catherine Madden is my YouTube channel. So check it out. I think I'm on video 18 now. Still trying to dial in as a photographer. It's my first time working with video, so I'm still trying to dial that in, but it's been a lot of fun, and it's been great to watch it grow.
I love watching it grow too, and I think your posts are really interesting and beautiful, so keep it up.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Kate, and thank you for enlightening us and sharing with us the struggles and the triumphs. And next week, we have a special episode that I am going to shift gears with. We don't know what we don't know, right? I didn't know what I didn't know. And that's what I'm going to talk about on the next episode. Next episode, I'm going to talk to you about diet. And the diet I'm going to talk about is keto. So some of you are familiar with the ketosis diet. Some of you are not. I don't consider it a diet at all. I consider it a lifestyle. And I will explain all of that next week and what it actually does in your body and why so many people are jumping on board with that diet. I want to thank you all for listening to Fear It Goes. If you are enjoying this podcast, please come leave comments. I need to know what you're thinking. I need to know if you guys are interested in the topics I'm picking. I'm pretty positive when I bring the sex series, because I'm just kind of lining everything up right now with that. We're probably 2 months out, just letting you know. But when I bring that series in, there's going to be some controversial conversations that you may or may not agree with. And my purpose for these podcasts is that it sets thoughts in motion that allows you to expand and question the world around you, the way that you're thinking, the lenses you're wearing, and how you can enrich and better your life. Because trust me, your life definitely spills out into your business, your family. All other aspects of your world are affected by what's happening within you. So come check us out at fearitgoes.com. That's fearitgoes.com, and see what we're doing. I told you last week that we are releasing Clarity, which is a goal-setting course. It's fantastic. If you haven't checked it out, please come check it out. There's lots to be learned in that course, and it's a bargain. It's a bargain. If you are enjoying the podcast, please let us know. Leave a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Leave a comment. Bring people to us. Spread the word. Spread the love. Spread the Fear It Goes love. And until next week, my beautiful souls, thank you so much for listening and have an absolutely extraordinary week.